If you believe that real service never fades, even when the world forgets your name, like and subscribe, because this story will remind you why silence can sometimes speak louder than rank. She wasn't famous. She wasn't even supposed to stand out. Just a woman at a weekend market by the docks, arranging seashells and wooden anchors while gulls circled above and the scent of salt and diesel drifted through the air. But that morning, everything changed. The morning an Admiral walked straight through the crowd, stopped in front of her stall, and said the words no one there would ever forget. "Operator Morgan, report to command." And from that second on, nothing in Harborview would ever feel ordinary again. The story began long before that day, long before the uniform she once wore was folded away in a cedar chest beneath her bed. Leah Morgan was 28, quiet, steady, and always early. She rented a single room above the old fishmonger's shop, woke before sunrise, and walked the 3 blocks to the harbor carrying 2 weathered crates of crafts. Most people thought she was a local girl who'd never left town, someone who just liked the sea. They saw her hands, scarred but careful, shaping bits of driftwood into miniature ships, threading rope through polished shells. They didn't notice how her eyes always flicked to the horizon before she began her day, like she was waiting for a signal that never came. Harborview Market was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business. Mrs. Delgado sold her famous crab rolls, shouting prices that changed depending on her mood. The Pearson twins sold antique fishing tools they barely understood. And Leah? Well, she was just the quiet one, the girl with the blue jacket and too straight posture. A few of the older vendors whispered that she must have come from a strict family, maybe military. One even joked, "Bet she irons those seashells before she sells 'em." They laughed. She smiled politely, and life went on. What no one saw was how the laughter echoed for her. How the smallest sound, the ping of a metal pipe hitting the dock, the low blare of a ship's horn, could pull her somewhere far away. A dark control room under the Pacific, lights flickering red, water hammering the hull, her headset crackling with voices that depended on her comm. She'd left that life 3 years earlier, after an operation whose details she could never speak aloud. Operator Morgan. They used to call her Voice of the Fleet. And one day, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. Now she kept her distance. Her world was small, predictable, and safe. Every Saturday, she set up her stall in the same corner, beneath the blue awning that flapped like a half-raised flag. And every Saturday, she lost herself in her work. She had a rule: never talk about the past, never draw attention, and never, ever react when someone mentioned the Navy base down the road. But Harborview didn't make it easy to hide. Sailors on leave often came through, loud, young, half-drunk on freedom. They swaggered through the rows of stalls, tossing coins, flirting with vendors, retelling stories that weren't theirs. Leah kept her head down, arranging her shells by size and color, pretending not to hear. That morning, though, one voice carried sharper than the rest. "Hey, check this out," a young lieutenant called, leaning over her table. His name tag read Hayes. He picked up one of her carved anchors, holding it like a toy. "You selling souvenirs or recruiting sailors?" The men around him laughed. Leo looked up just once, meeting his grin with a calm, practiced silence. "At ease, ma'am," he said with a mock salute. The laughter grew louder. A few vendors nearby joined in, relieved it wasn't them being targeted. Leah's hands never stopped moving. She placed another shell in its slot, tightened a line of twine, wiped the sea spray from her stall sign. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft but steady. "Those anchors are hand-carved. If you're not buying, please put it back." Hayes blinked, thrown for a moment by the authority in her tone. Then he smirked and dropped the anchor back with a loud clack. "Yes, ma'am. Wouldn't want to upset the Admiral of Crafts." More laughter. Leah said nothing. What none of them noticed was the black SUV pulling into the lot near the harbor gates, its tinted windows catching the glare of the morning sun. 2 uniformed officers stepped out first, scanning the market with practiced precision. Then the back door opened, and the crowd fell into a ripple of whispers. An Admiral here? At the weekend market? It couldn't be, but it was. Leah didn't see him at first. She was busy retying a banner that had slipped loose. But the moment his voice cut through the noise, low, commanding, unmistakable, her hands froze mid-knot. The air around her seemed to thin. The other vendors straightened instinctively, without even knowing why. And then the footsteps came, slow, deliberate, crunching across the gravel until they stopped right in front of her stall. The Admiral's shadow fell across her table. For a long moment, no one spoke. The young lieutenant who'd been mocking her seconds earlier stepped back, his smirk dissolving into something uncertain. The Admiral looked at Leah as though he were looking through time itself. His voice carried the weight of oceans. "Operator Morgan," he said quietly, "report to command." The world went still. The only sound was the wind brushing through the flags overhead. Leah's breath caught. The old title, one she hadn't heard in years, hit her like a memory she'd buried too deep. She wanted to speak, to deny it, but muscle memory betrayed her. Her shoulders straightened. Her chin lifted. Every trace of the market vendor vanished. People stared. The laughter died. Someone dropped a cup of coffee, but no one turned to look. Even the seagulls seemed to hold their cry. The Admiral studied her for a long moment, the faintest flicker of pride softening his expression. "It's been a while since tidefall," he murmured, and though the words were quiet, they carried across the market like thunder. Leah's face paled. A few older sailors froze in place. They knew that name. Operation Tidefall wasn't something you joked about. It was a whispered legend, a mission buried so deep it barely existed in records. Leah opened her mouth, but no sound came. The Admiral nodded slightly, as if confirming something only he understood. "We thought you were gone," he said. "Turns out, you were just guarding a different kind of post." And just like that, every pair of eyes in Harborview saw her differently. Not as the shy girl with seashells and rope, but as something else, someone else. The officers saluted first. The sailors followed, stiff and uncertain. Hayes lowered his gaze, face drained of color. Leah's hands trembled against the edge of her stall. She hadn't expected this, hadn't wanted it. She'd come here for quiet, not recognition. But as the Admiral stood before her, the past she'd spent 3 years trying to silence rose all at once. The faces of her old crew, the hum of the comms line, the whispered orders that had once guided fleets through chaos. The market would never forget that moment. The day a woman selling seashells became the center of gravity in a world that had forgotten how to see quiet strength. And as she stood there beneath the fluttering awning, every crack in her voice, every scar on her hands, told a truth the crowd was only beginning to grasp. The story of Leah Morgan was just beginning. The market square stayed frozen long after the Admiral's voice fell silent. For a full breath, nobody moved. Not the vendors, not the sailors, not even the wind. Leah stood there, caught between two worlds, the quiet rhythm she'd built for herself and the one word that had just shattered it, operator. The title still echoed in her head like a forgotten frequency, pulsing against the heartbeat she tried to steady. The Admiral's gaze didn't waver. "You were never discharged, Leah," he said, his tone firm but gentle. "You were reassigned. Classified operations sometimes stay that way." He paused, glancing at the stunned faces around them. "But I'll break one rule today, because they deserve to know who you are." He turned slightly, addressing the crowd that had gathered. "During Operation Tidefall, our fleet lost communications across the Pacific. We were blind, dead in the water, and this woman," he said, gesturing to Leah, "held the line for 9 hours straight. She rerouted satellite channels manually, by signal, under fire, while the rest of us prayed the sea would spare us." A low murmur rippled through the onlookers. A few of the older sailors straightened unconsciously, recognizing the name. Others just stared, their disbelief giving way to awe. Leah's throat tightened. Her fingers curled around the edge of the stall, as if anchoring herself. "Sir," she managed, voice trembling. "That was years ago. I'm not that person anymore." The Admiral shook his head slowly. "Service doesn't fade because time passes. You walked away to heal, not to disappear. That's what real strength looks like." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "We lost good people that night, but we survived because of you. And I promised myself that if I ever found you, I'd say thank you properly." The sailors who had mocked her earlier were silent now, eyes down, shame burning across their faces. Lieutenant Hayes swallowed hard, the weight of his earlier arrogance pressing into his shoulders. He tried to speak, but couldn't find words. Leah looked at him, then back to the Admiral. "I didn't do it for medals," she whispered. "I did it because it was my post. The Admiral smiled faintly, eyes glinting with something between respect and sorrow. That's why you deserve them. He opened the small velvet box he carried and set it on her table. Inside, under the glare of the market lights, lay a single reissued citation, her service medal, long lost to bureaucracy. The Admiral's hand lingered over it. "We kept this safe," he said, "because you kept us alive." No one dared breathe. Leah's composure cracked, just for a moment. Tears welled, unbidden, slipping down her cheek before she could stop them. The Admiral stepped back and saluted her, crisp, deliberate, flawless. Every uniformed sailor in the market followed. Even the vendors, unsure of the protocol, bowed their heads in quiet respect. Leah returned the salute, her hand trembling slightly, her breath caught between pride and disbelief. The sound of the harbor swelled again. The gulls, the wind, the creak of ships at anchor. But it all felt different now, as though the sea itself recognized her. When the Admiral finally turned to leave, he said only one thing more. "The post is yours, operator, whatever form it takes now." And just like that, he was gone, his convoy pulling away down the narrow road. The market exhaled as if it had been holding its breath for hours. No one went back to laughing. No one dared. They just watched Leah, standing behind her stall with the metal glinting in the light. A quiet reminder that some battles are fought long after the war ends. Even after the Admiral's convoy disappeared down the road, Harborview Market didn't return to its usual chatter. The air itself felt changed, thicker, quieter, as though the sea had decided to hold its breath. Leah stood behind her stall, the velvet box still open on the table, the metal inside glinting with each passing ripple of sunlight. Around her, no one spoke. People who had been mid-sail moments ago now just stared, unsure if they were supposed to clap, salute, or simply stay silent. The silence didn't bother her. It never had. She'd lived in silence for years, the kind that hums beneath a warship's hull when you're the last one awake, the only one listening to static and code in the dark. But this silence was different. This one felt like understanding. Slowly, the market began to breathe again. Vendors shifted awkwardly. The old crab roll lady dabbed her eyes with her apron. A young boy tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mama, was she really a soldier?" His mother nodded faintly, unable to look away. And then Lieutenant Hayes, the same man who'd been laughing minutes earlier, stepped forward. His voice was quieter now, stripped of arrogance. "Ma'am," he said, hat in hand. "I didn't know." Leah looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Most people don't," she said simply. "That's why it's easy to forget what respect looks like." He opened his mouth to apologize, but she lifted a hand gently, stopping him. "You've already done it," she said, "by listening." The words landed softly, but they hit harder than any reprimand could. Hayes stepped back, his jaw tight, shame written plainly across his face. As the hours passed, the spell began to lift. Customers drifted back cautiously, some pretending to browse, others openly curious. Leah didn't speak much. She sold her crafts, gave back change, nodded politely, and carried herself with that same quiet composure. But now, every glance held something new, reverence. Even the vendors who used to tease her now called her Miss Morgan instead of Kid. By late afternoon, the tide began to rise, and the air turned cool. Leah started to pack her things. Her fingers brushed the velvet box one last time before she closed it. The metal wasn't for display. It wasn't a prize to show off. It was a memory, proof that once, when everything depended on her, she hadn't failed. She lingered before leaving, looking toward the docks. The sea was calm, reflecting streaks of amber and violet from the sinking sun. For a moment, she imagined the rhythmic pulse of sonar again, the hum of engines, the voices calling through static, all ghosts now, but somehow closer than they'd been in years. She pressed her palm against her chest, feeling the metal's shape through her jacket. "Post secure," she whispered. The words came out instinctively, a habit she thought she'd lost. When she turned to leave, a small group of sailors was waiting nearby, not out of obligation, but out of something that looked a lot like gratitude. One of them, barely 20, stepped forward nervously. "Ma'am," he said, "my father served in Tidefall. He always said someone on the line saved them that night. Guess I just wanted to say thanks." Leah smiled softly, eyes glistening. "Then thank him back," she replied. "He was there. I just made sure they heard him." The young man nodded, words caught in his throat. As Leo walked past, he saluted. One by one, the others followed. No one told them to. The next weekend, she was there again. Same blue awning, same neat rows of seashells. But people came differently now. They came early, stood in quiet lines, not for the trinkets, but for the woman behind them. Even the Admiral's visit had become local legend. The day an operator came home, kids asked to hold the tiny carved ships she made, and Leo would smile, guiding their hands gently. "Steady," she'd say. "Everything worth steering takes patience." The sailors who stopped by never joked again. They called her ma'am, asked for advice, and listened when she spoke about wind, tide, and stillness. They didn't realize she was still teaching, the same way she used to lead, with quiet precision and an unshakable calm. Weeks turned into months, and people stopped calling her the quiet one. They started calling her operator, a nickname said with pride, not mystery. A plaque appeared one morning on the wall beside her stall, hand-carved by the local dock workers. Leah Morgan, operator, Fleet Voice, Harbor View's steady watch. She never mentioned who put it there, but she touched it every morning before setting up, the way some people said a prayer. On one calm evening, Leah closed her stall after everyone had gone. The harbor lights shimmered across the water like 1,000 small signals blinking in code. She stood at the edge of the pier, the metal resting in her palm. Then, without ceremony, she lifted it toward the sea, letting the moonlight catch on its surface before tucking it safely back into her pocket. She had nothing left to prove. The Admiral's words, the salutes, the whispers, they had all done what they needed to do. They reminded her that silence wasn't invisibility. It was discipline. It was control. And for people like her, it was home. As she walked away, the wind carried the faint creak of the flagpoles and the sound of waves folding over themselves. Somewhere behind her, the vendors were packing up, talking quietly about the day an admiral had saluted a market girl. They didn't know her story, not fully, but they carried its echo, the reminder that courage doesn't always wear combat boots or carry weapons. Sometimes it sells seashells at dawn and keeps its promise to never stop watching the horizon. Leah Morgan didn't go back to the Navy because she didn't need to. The post had changed, but the mission hadn't. Protect what matters, stay steady, speak only when it counts. And every morning after, when the first light touched the harbor and the gulls cried overhead, she'd look out toward the sea, smile faintly, and whisper the same 3 words that once kept a fleet alive. Channel secure. Always.